Welcome. In this video we're going to create our second leg by cloning our first leg and learn a little bit about using static transformations. So the first thing that we want to do is to select our leg group, and we are going to make a clone of it. Now when we start doing all of the work to change deformers, positioning, alignments and everything so we can create the separate leg, one thing I do like to do is to turn off animate so I'm not generating keyframes along the way, because I don't need those keyframes. So I've selected my backdrop, which selects all the art layers and element layers, deforms, pegs, everything, and we go under our node menu, and under nodes we will see options to clone selected drawings and timing, drawings only, or duplicate. So duplicate does exactly that. It duplicates it, but it leaves no connection to the original. Clone makes a direct copy of it. Drawings only means if I add, say on the hands, if I add an additional drawing to one hand, it will show up in the cloned hand. So that's the advantage of using cloning, is if I make these changes to drawings, adding drawings or modify drawings, then that will affect both the original and its clone. If I do drawings and timing, every time I animate one part, it's going to animate the other and duplicate the keyframes, which can get pretty messy. So we don't want that to happen. So we just want to choose drawings only, and we can now see it gave me this second backdrop here. So the first thing I'll do is just recolor that backdrop and rename it, so that we can see a difference between them. So that helps there. Now it's not connected to our project yet, and we have the hips layer, which we'll have to deal with here in a little bit as we will be completing out the lower body. But what I want to do is to actually add a composite here. And this will be my character composite here. So I will just rename this character comp and set that up, drag that into my option there. We can put the OGL comp so it's going into it as well. And now with the leg comp, I can select that and hold down Alt and click on the character comp, and it inserts it into it. So it now is putting it behind it. To connect the OGL controller here, instead of trying to drag my spaghetti cable across, I can select that, hold down Alt or Option, and click on the OGL comp, and it now selects that as well. So there, those are sitting with it. Whoop, wrong option. Alright, so now we have the right leg, and when I click on the right leg, we can see it selects it. Red box because we're not animating right now. And what we want to do is to add a peg to handle our flip. So I'll click on the leg master, and Command or Control P, it gives us a peg. Now this peg, I don't need to worry about naming it or anything else. This is just a temporary peg that we'll use to handle the flip, and we do the flip by clicking on our flip horizontal, and it moves that leg over. Great. So we have handled the flip. Now if I needed to flip it and slide it one way or the other, so like when we look up here, if we know that the center of the artwork is here, but the character is not standing perfectly upright, but they have a little tilt and lean, so technically this left leg is a little bit higher, the right leg is a little bit lower, so we got the hips leaning, the body's, it's got a little attitude going on with that. It's not just a perfect symmetrical layout. Now if it was perfectly symmetrical and I wanted to leave it like that, we could say, hey look, we're done. We've now flipped it and we have a symmetrical character. And we can. But if I want to modify this so that when the character is in a front view, we have this stylistic pose, that's where we're going to modify it. But to store this information, so it's not just stored on this peg, we want it to be baked into it so all of these layers are permanently flipped. And the way that we handle that is we use a static transformation node. So we pull up a static transformation node. I can hold down Alt or Option and drag that in above the master so that it is now sitting above that. And if I click on its options, what we have an ability to do is to bake or make permanent that flip that we did, that horizontal flip. So now if I click on this button right here, it effectively is now put it in. So we flipped it, and now by baking it in, it flips it back again. We're like, okay, that's not really helping, until we take this peg that had the flip in it and delete it, and now we can see the leg is there and it's been flipped. So the static, by going into now the master peg here, stores all of that information. It is not a keyframed one, so having that static transformation is super awesome and helpful for arranging our stuff. Now I can just click on my master peg here and I can start building out my arrangement. So we'll be doing some work with our deformers. We'll be moving some things around. Now the knee crease, we have a couple options to look at with the knee crease. One is I could just rotate it around so it fits, but it also seems that it keeps hitting on the same side when the knee crease is showing. So we have both there, both there. So what we want to do with the knee crease is we're just going to select the knee crease and I will flip it back. And now zoom in so I can actually grab my controller and I can move it and then rotate it. So we can see just how useful having those OGL controllers are for selecting something that's half on, half off, hard to access at times. Now, I think I'm going to use some of the same method that we used before, where I turn off a given layer so that we can work on adjusting its shape so that we can see the artwork and align it a little bit better. Now one thing I'm noticing is it's a little difficult to see the original artwork of how I want the lines to line up. So when I click on my artwork, if I want to look at its deformer and adjust it, I'd have to keep kind of pulling in and out to see, so I don't really have the target that I'm aiming for. One trick that we can use is I can pull up a transparency node and attach that. Now if I stick the transparency node in and then put that on top, so it's sitting on top of my character comp. Now when I click off and look at my character comp, now I can better see what's there. Now by default a transparency node comes in at 50%. We can adjust that down in the timeline, or I can go into the node up here and I can make it, say like 30% if I, well, not 100. So if I want to make it even lighter while I'm working, so I can better see what I'm doing. So now if I click on the upper leg up here and want to modify this, I have a little better guide as to what I'm trying to do. So we're trying to create some of that knee in here, pull that thigh in a little bit, a little bit of bend with the thigh there, a little over on that. So that allows me to better see what I am trying to line up. Disable that. Go active on that. And I think we need to zoom out here a little bit. Active on the lower leg master. I think we need to align things a little bit more. I'm going to set the heel in place there, then go into the foot, pull the foot down, but it does seem on the lower leg, as we look at this, that if I hold down shift, I want to make this just a little bit bigger. To have a little bit of scale change going on there. And then we'll have to use some deformers to align our artwork. And it's just going to be a matter of pulling these points in until we start achieving the shapes that we want to have happen. With the artwork. And I think that's getting me, oh, missed that one. Getting me pretty darn close to what I want to achieve. Now I can see that we're going to have to do a little bit of work on the stripe. So if I go into the upper stripe here, this is why we put that curve. And actually, before we do that, I think we want to reposition the whole of the stripe. Okay. Not quite. Looks like on the stripe, this upper stripe never got its pivot point set. So that's all the way up there when its pivot point really should be something more akin to that. So that's unfortunate. But now, this is where we can set up that stripe and go to the other stripe here. So if I'm on the deformer, looks like if I select on shift, I can select those points of the deformer, move that over. We'll get those set up. Now if we go into the foot deformer and take a look at that. we're able to start to line things up a little bit more. Looks like the foot is going to need to stretch out a little bit because it's breaking. So selecting a few more points here, pulling that down, pulling that up, and I'm seeing that we may actually, once I start dragging it to kind of become the shape, we may need to separate the foot into a couple art layers. So we have this sole, the toe cap, and then the main part in the red boot to fully control this, because the lines, if I zoom out here and even turn that off, we can see we got a little bit of breakage going on with a few of the lines here. And going to have to do a little bit of work, and this is part of the figuring out as we manipulate parts, how do they work, or do we need to go and provide other options. So the boot as that lower boot is set up here, because the stripe is separate. The stripe looks like it's kind of working, but the boot with its two tones didn't deform quite right on the shape. So when we're looking at the color on it, that line there, so instead of having the two-tone in it, trying to be lazy, if we're doing this much change, it's causing some issues on it. So let's see if we can rectify that a little bit. So this is a little bit of a setback here, that I was trying to keep it really simple and the minimal amount of layers, but it looks like to handle where the boot is meeting the lower leg, I'm going to need to separate that out. And as I study the rest of the views here and look a little bit more at the foot, to maintain the integrity of the boot shape, so I have this curve here but keeping the line, I think what's going to need to happen is I will have to separate it into, as I have the sole stripe, I have the toe cap, and then I have the heel cup. We are going to take one deviation because it does seem in the one view here they left that white, but it doesn't make sense when in all the other views we don't see that happening. So I'm not going to include it. So we're going to have a stripe piece, a heel cup, and a toe piece. And if those are all separate, then we can move them around, and we'll use the base of the primary foot as a cutter, so then that will end up cutting out the artwork for those so that they will exist inside the perimeter of the shoe. But by moving them independently, then we will be able to avoid where we start seeing some of these kind of line breakages occurring. So I was hoping we'd be able to just do it with a simple deformer and the lines would hold their shape, but they're not giving the full control that we're going to need to be able to manipulate this to create all our different views. So that means we're just going to redo a couple things here. So I'm just going to put that back underneath because we'll be doing some drawing on top. We can reactivate that. And what we have here for this right leg, I think we're just going to take all of it and nuke it and go back into the main foot and start breaking that back down separately and then reclone it, because the cloning part, well, is not terribly difficult. So we will revisit that reworking the boot next.